So, what happens when a global superpower decides to just arrest the leader of another country? Today, we are breaking down the capture of Venezuela's president, Nicolás Maduro. And trust me, this single event may have just redrawn the entire map of global power.
Picture this. It's January 3rd. While most of the world is sleeping, a U.S. military operation kicks off right in the heart of Caracas, and their target? Not a terrorist, not a warlord, but the actual sitting president of the country, Nicolás Maduro.
And the American response? It was immediate and absolutely stunning. Just hours later, President Trump steps up to a podium and makes this declaration. He's essentially announcing a U.S. takeover of Venezuela, setting the stage for a future that is, to put it mildly, uncertain.
So, the big question is, how on earth did they pull this off? Well, the mission had a code name, Operation Southern Spear, and it was all about speed, precision, and just overwhelming force.
Just look at these numbers, they really tell the whole story. The entire operation, from start to finish, was over in about 150 minutes. U.S. forces were actually on the ground in Caracas for only 30 minutes. But here's the stat that's truly mind-blowing. 0 U.S. losses. Not a single person, not a single aircraft. Militarily, it was a flawless operation. Politically, that's a whole other story.
So, the ones they were after, President Maduro and his wife, were snatched by the Army's elite Delta Force. And then, in a move that's just unprecedented, they were immediately flown out of their own country, onto U.S. soil, to face federal drug charges. You can just imagine the massive power vacuum this created back in Caracas.
And that brings us to the first huge problem, the first major ripple effect, the scramble for Venezuela's future. With the head of state literally gone, the question of who legitimately runs the country became a full-blown crisis, like instantly.
Okay, so Venezuela's Supreme Court tries to patch things up pretty quickly. They appoint an acting leader. But there's a huge catch. Her government gets its power from the very same Maduro regime that was just taken out. And that means most of the world isn't going to recognize her as the legitimate leader, which just plunges the country into this crisis where nobody can even agree on who's in charge.
And this right here lays out the impossible choice Venezuela is now facing. On one hand, you have analysts arguing you have to prioritize democratic legitimacy, go with the winner of a prior election. But on the other hand, you've got people saying, no, you have to prioritize stability, make a deal with parts of the old regime, otherwise the whole country could collapse into civil war. There is just no easy answer here.
All right, so that's the mess inside Venezuela. Now let's zoom out and look at the international shockwaves, because the impact on America's key rivals, we're talking Russia, China, and Iran, was immediate and it was severe.
For Russia, the timing here is just, wow, it's almost unbelievable. Just 4 days before the raid on December 30th, Russia's deputy prime minister was publicly talking about their deep strategic alliance with Caracas, boasting about their trust-based political dialogue.
And then poof, gone. In the blink of an eye, their steadfast partner was in U.S. custody. This completely shattered the Kremlin's image of itself as a reliable protector, and, you gotta believe, it seriously damaged the credibility of its security guarantees to its other allies around the world.
Now, let's talk about China, because for them, this is all about the money. And we are talking a staggering amount of money. Beijing is Venezuela's biggest creditor, having loaned them an estimated $100 billion. And overnight, all of that cash, all that investment, suddenly fell under the potential control of a government led by the U.S.
So what does Beijing do now? They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Do they play ball with the new U.S.-backed government to try and get some of their money back? Or do they fight back and risk losing literally everything? It's an incredibly tough spot to be in.
For Iran, the problem is a little different. Sure, money's involved, but the real blow here is strategic. Venezuela had become its most important friend in the Western Hemisphere. It was a key hub for dodging sanctions, and, critically, a logistics base for its proxy group, Hezbollah.
And to add insult to injury, there's also the financial hit. Iran is owed about $2 billion from various projects, and the chances of getting that money back from a new pro-US government? Yeah, probably close to zero.
Okay, so we've seen how this hit individual countries, but the ripple effects go way bigger than that. We're talking about a challenge to the entire international rulebook, putting the very idea of global order on trial. And this is where it gets really tricky, legally speaking. You have two completely opposite ways of looking at this.
The US framed it as simple law enforcement, just arresting fugitives who'd been indicted. But most of the world saw it as a blatant violation of the UN Charter, the very rule that's supposed to stop big countries from just invading smaller ones. It's a fundamental clash of national versus international law.
And it wasn't just random countries complaining. The head of the United Nations himself, Secretary General Antonio Guterres, immediately sounded the alarm. He called it a dangerous precedent and said flat out that the rules of international law have not been respected.
So as you can imagine, the world did not react with one voice. Not even close. It was a complete mess. You had big powers like Brazil and South Africa condemning it. India was cautious. The European Union couldn't even agree on a single position. And then you had some of America's regional allies, like Argentina and Ecuador, who were all for it.
So, why? Why go through all this trouble, all this geopolitical chaos? Well, at the end of the day, it really comes down to one thing: what's buried under Venezuela's soil. The real prize here is all about energy.
Let's just let this number sink in for a second. 303 billion barrels of proven oil reserves. That's not just a lot of oil. It's the largest reserve in the entire world. It's something like 17% of all the oil on the planet.
But here's the crazy part. It's like having a winning lottery ticket you never cashed. Because of decades of just terrible mismanagement, corruption, and sanctions, that massive resource has been pretty much sitting dormant. Production is just a tiny fraction of what it could be.
And this chart right here tells the story perfectly. Look at that drop. From a peak of 3.5 million barrels a day, production just cratered. The stated goal of the US is pretty simple: get American companies in there and turn the taps all the way back on. If that happens, it could completely reshape the global energy market as we know.
So this is the question we're all left with. Is this a new precedent for American power? A sign that the US can and will reshape the world however it sees fit? Or has this just kicked open the door to a new, much more dangerous era of global chaos, where the only rule is that there are no rules?